I was staring at my phone screen when the Instagram notification popped up, a tagged photo from my parents' account. There they were, champagne glasses raised on the deck of some Mediterranean yacht, my mother's Botoxed smile gleaming under the Santorini sunset. The timestamp showed it was posted 3 hours ago. 3 hours after I'd called them, sobbing, begging them to help me pay for Zoe's emergency appendectomy because our insurance had been mysteriously canceled and the hospital was demanding $8,000 up front before they'd even touch my 6-year-old daughter. 3 hours after my father had told me they couldn't possibly spare any money right now because they were dealing with their own financial pressures. The caption under their vacation photo read, "Living our best life. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself to the finer things. #blessed, #luxury travel, #no regrets." I felt something cold and permanent settle in my chest as I screenshotted that photo, knowing I'd never look at my parents the same way again. My name is Delara, and I work the night shift at St. Margaret's Hospital as a surgical technician. Most people don't know what that means, so I tell them I'm the one who hands surgeons their tools and makes sure nobody dies from infection. It's not glamorous, but I'm good at it. Really good. I've been doing this for 12 years, ever since Zoe was born, and I needed steady income with benefits. My apartment sits on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house in the old part of town. The stairs creak, the radiator bangs, but the rent is manageable and Zoe has her own room with windows that catch the morning light. She's 6 now, all gap-toothed smiles and endless questions about everything. Every morning when I get home from work, she's already up, eating cereal and watching cartoons before school. My parents live 40 minutes away in a gated community called Willowbrook Estates. Dad owns 3 dry cleaning locations across the city. Mom runs the books and manages their rental properties. They drive matching BMW SUVs and vacation twice a year. They've worked hard for what they have, and they never let me forget it. I learned early that asking them for help came with lectures about responsibility and poor life choices. So I stopped asking. If this story hits home, make sure you're subscribed. We tell these for a reason. The distance between my parents and me didn't happen overnight. It built up through years of small moments that felt like paper cuts. When I was 22 and pregnant with Zoe, I called to tell them the news. Dad's first question wasn't about my health or happiness. It was whether the father would be stepping up financially. When I admitted that Derek had already made it clear he wanted nothing to do with parenthood, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom finally spoke up to say they hoped I understood they couldn't be expected to raise another child at their age. 3 years later, when Zoe needed surgery to repair a hernia, I asked if they could help with the deductible. Dad met me at a coffee shop downtown and pulled out his checkbook, but not before explaining how this kind of situation was exactly why young people needed to think ahead and plan better. He wrote the check for $800 like he was signing my debt to him, not helping his granddaughter. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the way they made me feel like my struggles were character flaws instead of circumstances. When I worked double shifts to pay rent, I was being irresponsible for not spending enough time with Zoe. When I took a day off to attend her school play, I was being unrealistic about my priorities. Nothing I did was ever quite right in their eyes. But they loved posting about their successful daughter, the medical professional, on Facebook. They'd share articles about healthcare workers being heroes, always with some comment about being proud of their hardworking daughter. The praise felt hollow when it came through social media instead of phone calls. That Tuesday night in September changed everything. I was restocking surgical supplies in or 3 when my phone buzzed. Zoe's babysitter, Mrs. Chin from downstairs, was calling at 11:30 p.m. Zoe had been complaining about stomach pain all evening, but it got worse after dinner. Much worse. Mrs. Chin had taken her temperature, 102.4 degrees. Zoe was curled up in a ball, crying and saying her belly felt like it was on fire. I knew what appendicitis looked like. I'd assisted in enough emergency appendectomies to recognize the signs. I called my supervisor, grabbed my keys, and drove home faster than I should have. By the time we reached the emergency room, Zoe's temperature had climbed to 103.6. The on-call surgeon took one look at her blood work and scheduled immediate surgery. That's when the billing coordinator appeared with her clipboard and sympathetic smile. Our insurance had been canceled 2 weeks earlier. The hospital billing department had tried to reach me, but their calls went to voicemail during my work hours and I'd been too exhausted to return them. Some paperwork mix-up with my employer's insurance provider. The surgery would cost $8,200 upfront, or we'd need to wait for Medicaid approval, which could take days. I didn't have days. I didn't have $8,000 either. I called my parents from the hospital hallway, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. Dad listened without interrupting, then said they couldn't possibly help right now because they were dealing with their own financial pressures. Mom got on the line to suggest I call Zoe's father for support. I hung up and borrowed the money from my credit card with a cash advance fee that made my stomach hurt. Zoe's surgery went perfectly. She recovered like kids do, quickly and completely. But something inside me stayed broken. 3 hours later, Instagram showed me exactly what kind of financial pressure my parents were under. The next few days moved in a strange, numb rhythm. Zoe bounced back to her normal self, chattering about the nice nurses and the cool scar she'd have. I smiled and made pancakes and helped her with homework, but inside I felt hollowed out. I kept staring at that screenshot. The yacht. The champagne. The caption about treating yourself to finer things. I did the math in my head over and over. That Mediterranean cruise cost more than I made in 6 months. On Thursday night, after Zoe fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and really looked at my life. The stack of medical bills. The overdue notice from the electric company. The grocery list I'd been stretching all week to make $30 cover everything we needed. Then I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was little. She'd grown up during the Depression, and she had this way of looking at people who acted above their station. She'd narrow her eyes and say, "Pride comes before the fall, but sometimes the fall needs a little help." Grandma had been tough as nails. She'd raised 5 kids on her own after Grandpa died, working 3 jobs and never complaining. She taught me that people who looked down on others usually had something to hide, and that the best revenge was letting them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. I opened my laptop and started digging. My parents had always been private about their business dealings, but Dad loved bragging about his success on LinkedIn. I spent hours reading through his posts about expanding the dry cleaning business, his insights on small business ownership, his advice about building wealth through real estate. What I found made me sit up straighter. Dad had been posting about his government contracts, specifically the deal to handle all the uniforms for the county sheriff's department and the fire district. He was proud of this contract. Really proud. He posted about it constantly, sharing photos from the signing ceremony, talking about his commitment to supporting first responders. I knew something about government contracts from my ex-boyfriend Marcus, who worked as a city auditor. These contracts came with strict requirements about wages, working conditions, and employment practices. They also came with regular inspections and compliance reviews. I started visiting Dad's dry cleaning locations during my days off, not to spy exactly, but to observe. What I saw made my grandmother's voice echo in my head. The shop on Elm Street employed mostly undocumented workers who spoke little English. They worked long hours in poorly ventilated rooms with industrial chemicals. No safety equipment that I could see. No posted wage information or workers' rights notices that federal law required. The second location was better, but still cutting corners. Employees worked 10-hour shifts with no breaks. The time clock system looked like it had been rigged to round down hours. I started documenting everything with my phone camera. Schedule sheets left on counters. Workers eating lunch in the parking lot because there was no proper break room. Chemical storage that violated half a dozen OSHA regulations. My first attempt to contact the county compliance office failed miserably. I called anonymously, but the person I spoke to seemed more interested in protecting the existing contract than investigating problems. She asked so many questions about my identity and motives that I hung up. For 2 weeks, I thought about giving up. What was the point? My parents would never face real consequences, and I'd just look like a bitter daughter trying to cause trouble. But then Zoe came home from school with a story about Career Day, where kids talked about what their grandparents did for work. She was proud that Grandpa owned businesses and helped people clean their clothes. The innocence in her voice reminded me that this wasn't just about money, it was about what kind of world I wanted her to inherit. I changed my strategy completely. Instead of going through official channels, I contacted Maria Gonzalez, an investigative reporter for the city's alt-weekly paper. She'd written several pieces about labor violations and immigrant worker rights. Maria was interested, but cautious. She needed more than anonymous tips and blurry photos. So I arranged something that would give her everything she needed. On a Tuesday morning, I called Dad's main location and pretended to be from the county health department, scheduling a surprise inspection for Thursday afternoon. I knew he'd panic and try to clean everything up, which would give Maria the perfect opportunity to see the difference between the normal operations and the frantic cover-up attempt. Wednesday night, Maria and her photographer positioned themselves across from the Elm Street location. I fed them information about shift changes and delivery schedules. We watched workers stay until midnight, removing chemical containers and scrubbing equipment that probably hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Thursday morning brought the real county inspector, not the one I'd impersonated, but a different inspector conducting an actual surprise visit that had been scheduled weeks earlier. Pure coincidence, but perfect timing. Maria got it all on camera. The panicked scrambling. The hasty attempts to hide violations. Workers being sent home early to avoid questions. The inspector's increasingly serious expression as he documented one violation after another. But the beautiful part, the part that made my grandmother's spirit smile, came later that afternoon. The inspector discovered that Dad had been systematically underreporting employee hours to avoid paying overtime, while simultaneously claiming higher labor costs on his government contract invoices. He'd been essentially stealing from both his workers and the county. Maria's article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "Local Business Owner Accused of Bilking County While Exploiting Workers." It included photos of the violations, interviews with several employees who'd finally found the courage to speak up, and a detailed breakdown of how much money Dad had likely skimmed over the past 2 years. The county terminated his contract immediately. The Department of Labor opened a formal investigation. His business license was suspended pending review. Within a week, Dad was facing potential criminal charges for fraud and civil lawsuits from employees seeking back wages. I didn't call my parents. I didn't need to. They called me. Dad's voice was shaky, older somehow. He asked if I'd heard about the trouble with his business, if I knew anything about the reporter who'd been investigating him. I told him I'd seen the article and that I hoped the employees got the money they were owed. Mom got on the phone and started crying, talking about how they'd worked so hard to build something, how unfair it was that people were attacking them. She said they might have to sell the house, might lose everything. I listened to them panic about money for the first time in my life. I listened to them worry about bills and lawyers and what people would think. I listened to all of this while looking at the screenshot I'd saved of their vacation photos. When they finally stopped talking, I said something I'd been practicing for weeks. I told them I understood what it felt like to worry about money. I understood what it felt like to ask for help and be told that times were tough. I understood what it felt like to have people judge your financial decisions while living comfortably themselves. Then I hung up. 2 months later, Dad's business was sold to pay back wages and legal fees. They moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood. Mom got a job at a local real estate office. They stopped posting vacation photos on social media. I went back to my night shifts and my creaking apartment stairs. Zoe started 2nd grade and lost her 2 front teeth. We ate pancakes on Sunday mornings and watched cartoons together. The only thing that changed was how I felt when I looked at my life. It wasn't glamorous or easy, but it was honest work and honest struggle. That was enough. Sometimes I think about that night in the hospital hallway, holding my phone and listening to my parents explain why they couldn't help their granddaughter. I think about the choice they made to prioritize their luxury over her pain. They taught me something valuable, though they never meant to. They showed me that people reveal who they really are when someone they should love needs their help. I didn't destroy my parents' business out of spite. I just made sure that the same standards they'd held me to, work hard, be responsible, face the consequences of your choices, applied to them as well. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to hold up a mirror and ask the hard questions. Sometimes the people who judge others the harshest are the ones with the most to hide. Justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just making sure that people who exploit others finally face the same uncertainties they've forced everyone else to live with.